So the context information for the resurrection of Jesus, we have Old Testament prophecies, and we have Jesus' own predictions of his prophecy that were fulfilled. But then there's eyewitness testimony. Two classes there. We have the empty tomb, testimony of the empty tomb, and testimony of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. But we've never had scientific evidence for his resurrection before. We only have that now with the Shroud of Turin, with what we're saying here, because of the evidence for radiation causing the image and causing the shifting of the carbon date.
Welcome to the Tim Allman Podcast. It's a beautiful day to be alive. I pray the joy of Jesus is yours. He is so in love with you. He's called you, he's claimed you in the waters of baptism, and he's invited you into the adventure of a lifetime, which is locating where he is at in the world, where he is at work, drawing all people. We know this connected to Scripture, that God wants all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. The truth is Jesus revealed in his person and work, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, his ascension, the descension of the Holy Spirit, and his return to make all things new. We are wrapped up, enveloped in the greatest love story of all time. And today we get to hang out with Bob Rucker and Dr. Trey Cox, and we're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. Now, some opening comments from my perspective. Some people say, why do we even need, Jesus said, blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed, right? And I believe that the eyewitness reports are enough. And there are certain things that are popping up today in terms of dating of certain materials that were very evidently left, the Jesus burial cloth being one of them, that are very curious, that are very, very interesting. And there are a lot of scientists. It's funny how science kind of catches up with Scripture. There are some scientists who are looking at something like the Shroud of Turin and saying, wow, we should look more deeply at this. And one of those scientists is Bob Rucker. Let me tell you about him. And for those of you that are on YouTube, we actually have his slide deck that we're going to be following along here. So you get to see he graduated from the University of Michigan, nuclear engineering master's. He had 38 years in the nuclear industry, nuclear analysis, computer calculation, statistical analysis of measurement data, then 11 years now in Shroud research. You can find 39 papers that he has written at shroudresearch.net. And he's organized the International Conference on the Shroud of Turin, also known as the ICST, in 2017. Our goal today is to explain the mysteries and promote the future testing of the Shroud of Turin. How you doing, Bob? Thanks for hanging with us today.
Doing fine. That was a wonderful introduction, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. We're going to have a great time. So let's get into it. What is the Shroud of Turin, Bob?
Yes, well, a shroud, of course, is a burial cloth. Turin is a city in northwestern Italy. So when we refer to the Shroud of Turin, what we're referring to is a burial cloth that has been in Turin since 1578. And we'll get into the history of it a little bit later. But it's made of linen thread made from the flax plant. There's about 100 or more fibers in a linen thread. And it's woven into a 3-to-1 herringbone weave, which would make it very expensive. Therefore, Joseph of Arimathea, of course, was a very wealthy man, so he could have purchased it. So it's about 14 feet, a little over 5 inches long, 3 feet, almost 8 inches wide. But the unique thing about this piece of cloth, it's a linen cloth, is that it contains front and dorsal or back images of a crucified man that was crucified exactly as Jesus was crucified. So what is it? Could it be authentic? That's the question.
That is the question. Do you have any kind of estimate on how much such a burial cloth would have been in, and what that cost would be like in today's terms, Bob? Any idea there?
Yeah, I really don't. I've never heard that estimated.
Okay, but it was expensive.
It was
and
expensive,
it was large, and it was relatively, it's a thick piece of linen cloth. Is that correct, Bob?
Well, it's about as thin as a man's T-shirt.
Okay, so it's not exceptionally thick.
No, it's less than a millimeter in thickness, usually regarded as being about 0.35 millimeters in thickness, but it's very pliable. Linen has a characteristic of being highly resistant to insects. So if kept away from fire and moisture, it'll last for thousands and thousands of years, which is why we have a copy of it. We have the original.
We have the original, which is mind-blowing. So let's get into some of the images on the Shroud of Turin. For those that are on YouTube, you can kind of see this. And you got this. Well, just explain it. I'm gonna stop talking.
Yes, the first photograph was taken in 1898 by Segunda Pia. But with the unaided eye, it would look as we have on the top image here. There's two long scorch marks running horizontally on either side of the image, but the image is in between those scorch marks. On the left side is the front image with the feet to the left and the head to the right. On the right side is the back or dorsal image with the head to the left and feet to the right. So it's a head-to-head image. Now, that image is a very low contrast, so it shows up better under photography because photography automatically enhances the contrast. So the bottom image there shows the same, only in the camera negative. But it's interesting, the camera negative turns out to be a positive image, which means that the image on the shroud itself is a negative image. Now, at that point in time, when the photograph was first taken in 1898, they thought it must be some kind of a painting. But an artist or a painter could not paint what he had never seen, and he would have never seen a negative image at that point in history. So that just threw the analysis into disarray at that point. They didn't know what to make of it. So
and it's such
that's what we have. Go ahead. Every 10 years or so, it might go on display a few times. It was on display for example, in 1978, on the 400th anniversary of it coming into Turin. And so that's the photograph that I'll show you in a little bit.
This is unbelievable. There's so many things about this.
Yeah,
let's go into detail on the frontal image here. This is spectacular.
Yeah, so on the front image here from the top down, we have puncture wounds around the scalp. We have swollen cheek and nose from a beating. The nose is dislocated. Not the bone's broken, but the cartilage is evidently broken. There's a 2-inch wide elliptical wound in the side, just the size of a Roman thrusting spear, with blood and a clear blood serum running down, so that the heart had already stopped at the time that the wound was created. It's a post-mortem wound, so that the red blood cells were settling out of the clear blood serum, and that's why we have the two different components coming out of that wound. We have the blood coming down the arms on either side. Interesting that the blood is coming down at two different angles, corresponding to the two different angles that are created when the person being crucified pushes up and down to breathe. He has to push up and down, thus causing his arms to go into two different angles, and that's shown on the Shroud of Turin. The nail is through the wrist, not through the middle of the palm, because if it went through the palm, there'd be no bone structure above it. It would simply tear out under the weight of the body. But in ancient times, in Jewish culture, the hand went down to the middle of the forearm, so that it going into his wrist would be called into his hand. Interesting. That nail going through the location just above the wrist, at the very bottom of his palm, probably at a little bit of an angle, would have crushed the nerve which was gathering all of the nerves from the hand, and so it would have been extremely painful. This is where they get the term excruciating pain. But that would then automatically fold the thumbs over. I believe that's correct. And that's what we see on the shroud here. The paintings in the Middle Ages show the nail wound through the palm with the thumbs prominently displayed. So all the paintings from the Middle Ages get it wrong, but the Shroud of Turin gets it right. So the thumb would
have been in like this.
Yeah. So that the Shroud of Turin is not from the Middle Ages. You can tell that just from the location of the nail wound and the thumbs.
Well, that's what you say about that if this is a hoax, right? Because the original. So get into the dating kind of theories, if you will. It may be coming later, but let's just dismiss the folks that say, hey, this is only from 1,000 years old or something like that, rather than 2,000 roughly years old. Bob, could you get into that a bit?
Well, I'll get into that quite a bit later, but basically the only evidence against the authenticity of the shroud, I think, or at least the main evidence, is the carbon dating. And they dated samples from the corner of the shroud. I'll show that to you. And the answer to that carbon dating done by 3 different laboratories was that it dated from 1260 to 1390. But it's interesting that 2 of the laboratories didn't agree with each other. They were statistically different values, so that something strange is going on. Well, as it turns out, there's not just one result from carbon dating, there's actually 4. And the correct scientific solution to what the date is has to explain all 4 of those evidences, not just one. We'll get into that.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. So keep going down. You got scourge marks. Here's something wild. So you talk about puncture wounds. Yes. I heard recently there's a ridiculous amount of puncture wounds in his head from the very long Bethlehem type of the crown of thorns was very, very that would have hurt exceptionally. It's they were long, right? Get into how many puncture wounds we see both in his head as well as in the rest of his body from the beating.
Well, I've never heard of anyone counting the number of wounds in the scalp, but I suppose that's certainly possible to do. But there might be 20, 25, I would imagine, in the scalp.
I had heard 30, roughly.
30, yeah, somewhere in that range. I haven't counted them. That was just my best guess. But so over the whole body, I think there's like 120 is the usual estimate, and that's from the flogging that was done. So that each strike, the tool there that was used in the flogging would have had 3 different leather thongs coming out with a sharp or an item on the end tied into the end that looked like a miniature dumbbell. So it left 2 different marks with each stroke of the tool. So we have
a lot of marks.
Interestingly, we have nose and knee abrasions on one knee with dirt in them, and the nose, on the tip of the nose, and on one knee there are abrasions with dirt in it, consistent with one or more falls that Jesus took in carrying his cross, just the horizontal, I think.
And didn't they date that dirt? We know that dirt, Bob, is from first century Jerusalem. Like it is dirt.
Yes. The components of it are consistent with that dirt being from Jerusalem. Also, interesting here, there's actually a side strip to this cloth. It's about I think 5.2 inches, I kind of forget, or 3.2 inches wide, that was evidently cut off at some point and then sewn back on. Maybe in the company, the manufacturing company that actually made this piece of cloth in the first century. But the interesting thing is that the sewing of that seam was done with a stitch that's unique, though most similar to a stitch that was on a piece of cloth from Masada that was destroyed in 73 to 74 AD. So that stitch on that seam dates this cloth to the first century.
That's extraordinary. Frontal image. Yeah. All right, dorsal image.
Yeah. So again, we have puncture wounds on the back of the head. Now, these puncture wounds are not just from a ringlet, as it's commonly pictured, around the head, but it was a cap of thorns that was then beat on with rods. So you have these long thorns, 2 to 2.5 inches long, then beat into his scalp. Extremely painful to have a wound in your scalp like that. And this was probably done by Pontius Pilate to create compassion amongst the people, but they still, how evil the people were at that point, they still wanted him to be crucified as well. So he was, I think very uncommon to both scourge and crucify a person, but this person was, and I believe this is Jesus. So another thing to notice was that there were abrasions on his shoulders consistent with him carrying a rough, heavy object. And of course, people who read their Bible realize that Jesus carried the cross. And then we have a flow of blood, and the blood from the side wound then flowed across the small of his back, and we can see that on this dorsal or back image. On the feet, we have 2 nails through the feet. Well, what they did was they put 1 nail through the heel of one foot, and then they took the other foot and crossed it over top of the previous foot and put 1 nail through both feet. The 2 points to this is that this would allow one foot to rotate because it only has 1 nail in it, consistent with him having to push up and down to breathe. A second interesting point here is that you can see that the 2 feet are bent together, indicating that his feet were in rigor mortis after death, because he was on the cross for perhaps 3 hours or so after he had died, maybe more than that. But that would be long enough for the muscles to harden in that configuration. So both from the blood that was separated into clear and red components and due to the rigor mortis, this person that was crucified was certainly dead.
Well,
these were experts. You could tell whether the person being crucified was still alive or not from a block away. If he wasn't pushing up and down, he was dead. Yeah, if he was pushing up and down, he was still alive. Very easy to tell.
Yeah. Other interesting points are people have looked at his arms. I went back to the frontal image, and his arms look very long, and we believe that's because his shoulders were dislocated. Is that right, Bob?
Yes, at least one shoulder is believed to be dislocated. It could be both. Again, extremely painful.
And rigor mortis. So we know the body stays in rigor mortis post-mortem for what, upwards of 40, 45 hours. And I think we believe Jesus was in the tomb roughly around 30 hours. So
yeah, I think 36, I think.
Yeah, 30 some hours. Yeah. Pretty extraordinary when the resurrection moment, the flashpoint, the turning point of all of human history took place. You can see his knees are still upright in the shroud. Isn't that right, Bob?
That seems to be the case just due to the lack of the lessening of the image on the dorsal side at the knees.
Well,
yes. Now, one caution here. Sure. We know how long rigor mortis lasts in a person who dies normally. But how long it lasts in a person being crucified is another matter. He would have been extremely dehydrated, and there would have been all kinds of enzymes being pumped into his system during crucifixion from the extreme pain.
Yeah. Well,
but he did that. He did this all for us.
Amen. That's the power of the crucified one. I was just reflecting on the story of the transfiguration, and Peter wanted to build tents or tabernacle there. It's interesting. He puts Moses and Elijah on the same platform as Jesus. One for you, one for Moses and Elijah as well. Jesus, and then the cloud descends, the presence of God, and then the affirmation of the Father comes out. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And then he adds, "Listen to him." And then they look up. I love the story, and then they see Jesus only. And then as they're heading down the mountain, probably Mount Hermon, they start having this debate about Elijah and what it means that he's going to rise from the dead and that he's going to suffer. And then he gives this kind of explanation of, just as Elijah suffered, just as they did what they would to the new Elijah, John the Baptist. They realize now Matthew's gospel says John the Baptist, so they will do to the Son of Man. The fascinating thing is in the story in Mark's gospel, in the very same chapter, they start to debate among themselves, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? And it's like Jesus is like, you have no idea. You have no idea, because it's going to be the cruciform path that you all are going to follow. Right before the transfiguration, Jesus starts talking, pick up your cross and follow after me in Mark's gospel. So to go up is to go down in this upside down kingdom journey, which Jesus gives us. Up is down, and life always comes through death, and our life comes through the death of the crucified one, Jesus, who laid down his life for the sins of the entire world. And here we have one piece of cloth that gives us the flashpoint of all of human history. So could you talk about, and maybe you got it coming later in the slide deck, but how we got this image? We believe that it was the flashpoint. Is now a good time to talk about that, or do you have it later on, Bob?
Yes. This is a great time here. The next slide covers the issue of what would have happened to the shroud. Yeah. So of course, now the shroud would have been contained a lot of Jesus' blood. It would have been splattered in many different locations across the shroud. And how important was Jesus' blood in the theology of salvation in the early church?
Very important.
Of course, extremely important. So, would they have reused this piece of cloth? No, they wouldn't have. Would they have just thrown it out? No, they wouldn't. Would they have burned it? No, they wouldn't do that. Would it have been left in the tomb to be found by the Roman or Jewish leaders? Well, no, they wouldn't do that. So they would have kept it, and due to the persecution and due to the Jewish sensitivities against images, for example, they would be difficult for them to use it with Jewish audience. But it seems like in Galatians 3:1, I think they were using this for apologetics and evangelistic work up in Galatia, because Paul says something to the effect, I'm amazed that you so quickly departing from the faith even after you've seen the crucified Jesus. And, what is that referring to? Well, if it's not referring to the Shroud of Turin, I'm not sure what it would be referring to. So they saw it with their very eyes. It was some kind of an object that they saw with their very eyes. So what we're saying here is the Shroud of Turin, based upon the evidence, the scientific evidence and the historical evidence, that it started in Jerusalem, evidently taken down to Antioch before Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. You remember Jesus told them to do that, to get out of Jerusalem when you see the armies approaching. So they did. And they took it down to probably Antioch, from where it went out on various different missions, out to Galatia, back up to Edessa, now called Urfa, in Turkey, and then was taken up to Constantinople, I think in an effort to stay ahead of the Muslim armies. They keep the relics out of control of the Muslims. So then I'm putting dashed or dotted lines here on my figure because we don't know the route that it's taken, though we have evidence that it was there. So it may have gone from Constantinople either by water or across land up to Lorraine, France, where it was shown as the burial cloth of Jesus in 1355. So we have a continuous history for it from that point in about 1355 or 1356 in Lorraine, France. Across France, it was in a fire in 1532 in Chambéry, France, where the scorches were created. And then it finally came into Turin, Italy, up in northwestern Italy, in 1578. And it's been in Turin, Italy ever since. So one item I'd like to read to you was in a diary of a man named Robert de Clary. And he was a member of the Fourth Crusade. And while he was in Constantinople in 1203, he wrote in his diary, there was another of the churches which they call My Lady Saint Mary of Blackernay. Blackernay was a certain district in Constantinople, where there was the shroud in which our Lord had been wrapped, which every Friday raised itself upright so one could see the figure of our Lord on it. Very significant here. Constantinople, the rulers in Constantinople and the people there loved little gimmicks by which they could do wondrous little things, such as pulling, yanking a pulley underneath the box holding the Shroud of Turin to make it appear as though it's rising. So that's probably what they had done there in the church. They'd have it up on the podium or up on an elevated location. But what I wanted to tell you was that when they brought it into Turin, Italy, then in 1578, they brought it into the Savoy Palace, which my wife and I toured in November of 2023. But then the cathedral was built on the one end of the palace, and that's where it's has been located, and it is located today. And we saw the box in which it's located up in the front left-hand corner of this cathedral. And they have it on display just a few times a century. So in 100 years, they might show it, 5 or 6 times. So last time it was shown was in 2015. And my wife and I didn't go see it at that point because you can actually see it better just by looking at a photograph of it, because the photograph enhances the contrast.
Hey, how miraculous, you talk about that fire, how miraculous that it didn't like destroy the shroud for one, and that those scourge marks are like on the sides of Jesus's body. Like it's kind of miraculous, right?
Yeah, it's almost like it's divinely protected.
Protected, yeah, maybe so. So let's keep going. The image formation, talk about the Shroud of Turin research project that started in 1978.
Yes, well, I think the next topic here is just testing. You know, at this point you might say, well, if it's the Jesus burial cloth, well, let's test it scientifically. Well, that's been done. And this all arose because in the early 70s, a man named John Jackson, a professor at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, took a photograph of the face from the shroud and put it under an electronic device which translates light and dark areas to elevations. And what they found, I'm trying to remember the name of that device. It's not coming to me right now, but I just described it. But what they found was that on this two-dimensional image of the face on the cloth, it contains three-dimensional information. And so that applies to the entire body, so that you can back out a statue from the three-dimensional information on this two-dimensional cloth. Now, no normal painting or photograph contains three-dimensional information, but that fact puts the Shroud of Turin into the class of satellite telemetry data. Fascinating. So that amazing discovery was discussed amongst American scientists, and it created the Shroud of Turin research project. And for example, there was a group of about 40 individuals got together and planned out a long series of experiments, and then they were invited to Turin, Italy, to perform their experiments. And I have a picture here of John Jackson looking at the shroud with his high-powered microscope. And he's the leader of the Shroud of Turin Research Project. The acronym is STURP, S-T-U-R-P. So that, what was their goal? Their goal was to determine how the images were formed. Now, they did other experiments as well, but that was their overall goal. Because that's the main question. How were the images formed? So their conclusion here, now they worked for 5 days, 24 hours a day, in 3 shifts. They had 26 scientists with the team there that were working on this, and they had $2.5 million worth of equipment that had been donated to them for this project. So their conclusion here was that the image is not due to paint, dye, or stain, because there's no pigment, no binder, no brush strokes, no clumping of fibers or threads, no stiffening of the cloth, no cracking of the image along fold lines, most or all of which would be present if it was paint, dye, or stain, but it's not. So therefore, what is it? Well, next tests that were done, they looked at it with a high-powered microscope, and they found no capillarity, which capillarity is soaking up of a liquid. So therefore, the images were not due to any liquid. Well, fascinating. So maybe it's a scorch. It's about the color of a scorch, but could it be a scorch from a hot object? So they turned out the lights, brought up a black light to determine whether it was fluorescing. Now, that's a term where a scorch will absorb the higher energy light that we can't see, and it will re-emit it at a lower energy, which we can see. That's called fluorescence. But the image did not fluoresce, but the scorches from the fire did fluoresce.
Sure.
So the images are not due to a scorch. And because there's three-dimensional information on it, it can't be a photograph. So what is it? So they basically said, we have no idea what caused this image. Maybe someone in the future will be able to determine what it is.
That's amazing.
So I do, this is fascinating, isn't it? So I have a picture here of the 3-to-1 herringbone weave of the tip of the nose. Now, this is a 64 power that I'm showing. The tip of the nose would be presumably touching the nose or very close to the nose. If it was above the nose, be very close to the nose. But this is where the image should be strongest, but that's what you don't see. What you see, all you see is a little bit of discoloration on the top 2 or 3 layers of fibers in the thread. Now, again, the thread is composed of 100 or more fibers that are twisted together. So it's only the top 2 or 3 layers of fibers that are discolored. Then I have a slide that shows that this discoloration on the slide is just on the circumference all the way around the outside of the fiber, but the inside of the fiber is not discolored. So how in the world could this be done? Yeah, for example, if I gave you a flax fiber, now this fiber would be 1/5 the diameter of a human hair, and I assigned you the task of discoloring it with this extremely thin discoloration. It's less than 0.6 micrometers. It's about the thickness of a wavelength of light. It's about the distance of a wavelength of light.
Yep.
And the fiber itself is 1/5 the diameter of a human hair. How would you discolor it that way? I had to think a long time to figure out some way that this could have been discolored. And I did come up with a way that, based upon our known physics, this could be done. But I think before we get into exactly how the images were formed, let's get into the dating. And we mentioned this before. But the dating was done by cutting of small samples from the corner of the shroud. If the shroud is held horizontally, this would be the upper left, the upper right. I'm not sure how. If you're looking at it from below, it would be the upper left corner, but it would be off of his foot, located off of his foot over near the seam connecting the side piece with the main shroud. And this is right next to the corner, one of the corners of the shroud that had torn off at some unknown time in the past. The other corner at the other end of the shroud also had torn off. But this is where they would have held it during the exhibitions. And so that would have been a weak point because of the seam, and it evidently tore off. So they thought that's a good place to take the sample. So that's where they cut them. I show an image of them actually taking the cut in April 21st of 1988. And then the next slide shows how that cut was then displayed. And this is a diagram that I made up. You can see the backing cloth, the side strip, and then the main cloth below. There's a line, a horizontal line, and then to the right it shows a vertical line up to the seam that shows the cut that was made. And so there were 3 different pieces that were initially cut to go to Arizona, Switzerland, and Oxford, England, 3 different dating laboratories. And when they found that the sample that was sent to Arizona was a little bit smaller than the other 2, they cut another piece to go to Oxford, England. So Oxford actually received 2 pieces. And the second piece that sent to Oxford may have been cut from the other end. I think it probably was. But so I think I'm showing this in the wrong location. I think it should be on the other end of that other half of the piece. But those 3 samples then were sent to the 3 different laboratories. And then each laboratory took their sample and cut them into smaller pieces, so that we ended up with 12 different subsamples being dated at the laboratory in Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson. Now, I list these values in the sequence from the left side of the diagram, the small edge of the cloth, and that becomes important. Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson. So 3 samples from Oxford, 5 from Zurich, and 4 from Tucson were dated. Now, I calculate the dates on this. I do the statistical analysis. There's questions about the published values, but I did the analysis using the normal or Gaussian distribution assumption, as is very commonly done, so that I then weighted the uncertainties. I came up with dates for each laboratory, and then I came up with an overall date of 1277.8 plus or minus 12.6, whereas they came up with an uncertainty of 31. Quite a difference. It becomes very significant because so that we have 2 options. We have 2 options. One option is that, and this would be on the next slide, there's two options then. If the shroud dates to 1260 to 1390 AD, then it is not Jesus' burial cloth, of course, because Jesus died in either 30 or 33 AD. Now, the day that he died, we actually do know that because the day of his death was related to the Passover, which is related to the phases of the moon. So we can know the day, though there's some uncertainty as to the year. So it's probably either 30 or 33. I think 33 is the preferred year by the scholars for his death. So he certainly did not die during 1260 to 1390 AD. The second option is that if the shroud is Jesus' burial cloth, then the images could not have been made, the images could have been made in his resurrection. But why did the shroud carbon date to 1260 to 1390? So that in the first option, if it dates to 1260 to 1390, you have to explain how the images were made in 1260 to 1390 AD. No one's been able to do that. But if it dates to the time of Jesus, then how do you explain the carbon dating? Well, with my background in nuclear engineering, 38 years in the nuclear industry, it's almost like I've been specially prepared to take on this task. So what I've shown here, I show my diagram again, only putting in the years that they dated, and I point at the center of each of those samples. So if we plot those dates at the center of each of those samples, and plot it as a function of the distance from the left side of that diagram, the small edge of the cloth, then what we get is the next picture, which is a plot. The red points. The red points are the values. The vertical bar is the 1 sigma uncertainty. And what you see here is that in order to get a line through the 3 points of the data, I did a best fit calculation, which is a standard engineering procedure, to find the line that is the best fit through those values. And so I came up with y equals 35.87x plus a 1030.67. Well, the significant thing is the coefficient in front of the x, 35.87. Let's round it off to 36. So what that means is that the slope of this line is about 36 years per centimeter, which is equal to about 91 years per inch. So if you move the sample point up 10 inches, you would increase the carbon date by 910 years so that it would date to the future, which is interesting.
Yeah.
How can a piece of cloth date to the future? And so what they did in their analysis, they ignored this slope and they said, let's just take an average. And so they in my diagram, I show the black dashed line is a horizontal line at 1261, but it only shows it going through 1 point rather than 3. You need a sloped line to go through all 3 data points, okay? So I think it's important to cover a quote here related to this that Harry Gove stated, and this is a very interesting quote, and he was the main promoter of the carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin. And he said, "It is a well-known fact that scientists can produce whatever result they want. If you believe that passionately in something, you can steer the results." My God, we've all been guilty of that. Just amazing. I've heard it sometimes said, I think it's true. It might be just a joke, but I think it's true. If you take a sample in for carbon dating, you know what their first question is?
What?
How old is this?
Yeah, that's super ironic. Hey, let's pause right there, Bob. We got a statistician with us in Dr. Trey Cox. Any kind of take on this trajectory? I think it's super fascinating. I'm not a statistician, but that you could get to the point where you date the cloth into the future. Dr. Cox, anything to add here?
Well, I was wanting to maybe follow up on his points about the image formation not being a painting, if I could. Instead.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Just need to give a little bit of background on some mathematical ideas that support this. Of course, this is a 2D image, as Bob said, but it has 3D information embedded in it. So as far as what dimensions mean, dimensions are directions. So when we talk about 3 dimensions, we're talking about length, width, height, but current theory in physics and mathematics is there's most likely higher dimensions than length, width, and height. And when I say higher dimensions, I don't mean like most of us here, the 4th dimension is time. Well, that's a temporal dimension, time. The physics and even neuroscience right now is saying that they believe in their theories that there's higher spatial dimensions. So in neuroscience, current neuroscience trying to understand and wrap their mind around what consciousness really is.
Exactly
really
right.
difficult. There's
Exactly right.
There's up to 11 spatial dimensions in that model. And in modern physics, currently in string theory, quantum mechanics, which, by the way, is the background and support of mathematics of artificial intelligence, which is exploding right now. In that theory, there's up to 26 spatial dimensions. So just accepting current theory and science, thinking about what a transition from a 3rd dimension to a higher dimension. I did some research on that prior to our talk, and I found out that current theory says if something goes from a lower dimension to a higher dimension, there is a very high burst of energy and light. B, there's something called the holographic principle, which means that the object that's leaving one dimension and going to another leaves behind a lower dimensional projection, which kind of sounds like a Shroud of Turin picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Finally, the carbon dating issue that Bob just brought up. Carbon dating assumes there's a constant rate of change, so things don't change over time. So you can date things based on how things change consistently. Well, when you talk about going from a lower dimension to a higher dimension, photons, which are what light is made out of, that shifts their quantum states and possibly converts them into unknown particles that we don't even know exist. So think about what that would do to a linen fabric or material. I think the carbon dating assumption of a constant change is a big error, big mistake.
Yes. Carbon dating is done by measuring in a sample from the material. It's done by measuring the carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio, because
Right.
carbon-12 it does not decay, so it's static, but carbon-14 does decay with a half-life of 5,830 years, I believe. And so that ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 decreases with time, so that when they measure the carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio, then they make that assumption and use equations to then back out a date. But that date that's calculated from the ratio is only accurate if the assumption is correct.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that the assumption is not correct. That there was something else that was changing the carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio in the samples, and that was neutron absorption, creating new carbon-14 in those samples, which would then have the effect of giving a younger date, and that's exactly what we see. And it would explain, as I'll describe soon, it also explains why these dates did not agree with each other statistically. We'll get to that.
We will. Are we going to get to vertically collimated radiation burst, Bob?
That'll be the...
That's the final. All right, I'm not giving it away. Here we go. We're going to keep rolling. So we got the quote, statistical analysis disproves. Get into that. Do you need anything more to say here, Bob?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, we've finished with Harry Gove. Just amazing how you have to be careful with science to make sure that science isn't being done to just satisfy presuppositions, which is often the case. It's being done because they know what the answer is based upon their presuppositions. And I find that is the case. They presume that they know what the date on the Shroud of Turin is. It has to be consistent with when it was dated when it was exhibited in Lorraine, France in 1356 to 1355. And so they make that assumption. Therefore, they direct their statistical analysis to achieve that goal. It's goal-oriented. So that fits into Harry Gove's quote.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the British Museum, as I understand it, did not fully release all of the data on the carbon dating, one of the most important measurements ever done, and they wouldn't release the full data. They would only do so in 2017 under threats of legal action. They finally released it. Then it allowed Shroud researchers to do statistical analysis on the data, and they published 4 different papers in peer-reviewed journals, all of which concluded that the values, they would call them heterogeneous, that is, that they were not homogeneous. Now, what that means, heterogeneous means that the dates on the 12 subsamples, the carbon dates on the 12 subsamples, were not consistent with each other within their uncertainty. They were heterogeneous instead of homogeneous. Now, what that means is that something strange was going on. They should be consistent with each other within their statistical uncertainties, but they weren't. So what is it that was going on? Let me go through the next slide here. There's many different contradictions to the carbon date of 1260 to 1390. Gold microparticles have been detected on the Shroud of Turin, which dates it prior to probably 1204. The hand-spun thread on the shroud dates it probably prior to 1200. Colored line drawing, called the Hungarian Prey Codex of the shroud, it's dated from 1192 to 1195. There's coins that were minted and circulated as money, with the image from the face starting in about 692 AD. The first painting based upon the Shroud of Turin was in 570 AD. So all these values contradict the carbon date. Paintings and the Sudarium of Oviedo dates to 570 AD. That's the face cloth that's now in Oviedo, Spain. And then we believe it is the face cloth of Jesus mentioned in John 20, verse 7, based upon historical documentation that arrived with it in Spain. And then paintings and artwork starting about 550 AD. And then the size of the shroud is 8 by 2 cubits, which is the ancient measurement. So this is very ancient. Then number 8 was the accurate depiction of the crucifixion, indicates that the image was prior to 400 AD because crucifixion was outlawed in the early 300s. And then we have the tradition that it was taken up to Edessa, Turkey in about 200 AD. Then we have the ancient stitch that I mentioned to you that dates it to the 1st century. And radiation damage to the fibers is similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date before 70 AD. So there's a lot of different date indicators that contradict the carbon dating. But the most important one is that we have recent inventions of new dating techniques for dating fabric specifically to date the Shroud of Turin. And so we have 4 different methods that were applied one was applied in 2 different locations. But these 4 methods agree with the death of Jesus in the 1st century, and they contradict the radiocarbon dating. Now these methods are based on either mechanical properties such as tensile strength and how tensile strength decays or decreases with aging, or spectrographic analysis. That is how linen changes in reflection of light with age. The last date that has created such a popularity of the shroud in recent months, I would say, would be the Waxis method, WAXS, which is I'm trying to think what the W stands for. Anyway, this is the X-ray analysis of the Shroud of Turin, maybe weighted X-ray analysis of the Shroud of Turin, and that dates it very, very close to the time of Jesus. The uncertainty. The time of Jesus is within the uncertainty of 3 out of those 5 measurements. So that this is good evidence that the Shroud of Turin actually dates to the 1st century. But then the question is, Well, then how could the carbon dating be so wrong? And that's why I think my work then becomes important. So my neutron absorption hypothesis is stated this way, and I should mention that my write-up on this is in my paper 33 in my website, which is shroudresearch.net. Paper 33 writes up my carbon dating hypothesis. 34 documents my image formation hypothesis. So the neutron absorption hypothesis is that neutrons were included in the burst of radiation that caused the images, and we'll get to that in a minute. A small fraction of these neutrons were absorbed in nitrogen-14 in the cloth to produce new carbon-14 atoms. When the nitrogen-14 absorbs a neutron, it kicks out a proton immediately, and then the nucleus of the atom changes to carbon-14. And this caused the shroud to be carbon dated younger than its true age. So I then, based on this neutron absorption hypothesis, I took one of my nuclear analysis computer codes that I'd been running for years in the nuclear industry, and this is called MCNP. It's an acronym for Monte Carlo N particle, where the N stands for neutrons. So it can calculate distributions of neutrons and many other particles for that matter. But what I end up with here, and I hope people can see this slide because this is important. This is the results of my nuclear analysis computer calculations. And on the y-axis, it shows the carbon date. On the x-axis, it shows the distance along the back, the center line of the body on the dorsal or back image, along the backbone, you might say. And so the second point from the left is the carbon dating value, because I normalize all the results from my calculation to something. The only thing I could normalize it to was the dates that were actually produced by the three laboratories. So I normalized the second point from the left to their average value of 1260. But the two items of importance here. One is that that second point from the left, you can see has a certain slope to it. That's important. The other important point is that if you could get a sample from underneath the center of the body mass on the dorsal image, I predict that it would carbon date to 8,500 AD based upon neutron absorption at that point, which would be, so this hypothesis is very testable. So a sample by the right elbow would carbon date to 4,500 AD. By the left elbow would carbon date to 3,500 AD. It's different because by the right elbow would be the limestone wall on that side. So then this slope that I pointed out to you is just the slope that I previously showed to you that results from the three laboratory values. So that the calculated MCNP computer calculation based upon neutrons being homogeneously or uniformly emitted in the body produces the same slope to the data as obtained by the three laboratories. Now that's amazing. It indicates I'm doing something right. Okay. The other interesting item here is that the Sudarium of Oviedo, the face cloth of Jesus, was carbon dated to 700 AD. And at that point, it was said that, well, this can't possibly be authentic. But I predicted that face cloth in the tomb would be dropped on the right bench, because most people are right-handed, and it would be dropped just next to where the person was doing the burial, was standing at the front of the pit or stand-up area. So about 15 to 18 inches in front of the back bench. So it would be on the right bench, 15 to 18 inches in front of the back bench. That was my prediction. When I did the calculation, the carbon date for that location was 700 AD, just what the laboratories determined. To me, this is an amazing confirmation. This concept has also been confirmed by testing of my results against fluorescence on pictures that were taken in 1978. And there's a very interesting correlation between the two. So let's go on to the next. So that there are actually four different dates, four different types of evidences from carbon dating. We have the mean value of 1260 to 1390. Number two, we have the slope of about 36 years per inch, which is 91 years, 36 years per centimeter, which is 91 years per inch. The third is just the distribution and range of carbon dates for the 12 subsamples. And I haven't completed that yet. I'm now starting and trying to do that. It's more difficult because these subsamples are so small. And then the fourth is the date for the face cloth of Jesus, known as the Sudarium of Oviedo. So far, my calculations have proven to be correct for number 1, the average, number 2, the slope, and number 4, the date for the face cloth, but not for number 3 yet. And that's what I'm working on now, to try and determine whether my methodology is consistent with that. If I can do that, I think we'll have good evidence that what they were actually obtaining in their carbon dating, they were actually obtaining evidence for the neutron distribution in the tomb rather than for the true date, rather than from the true date of the shroud, which is very interesting.
Very interesting.
So let's go into how the images were formed now.
So to summarize, Bob, the carbon dating is wrong. That's what the layman kind of thinks. Is that fair?
Yes. What I'm saying here is that the equipment worked correctly.
Sure.
In obtaining the correct ratio of the carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio. But those ratios had been altered by absorption of neutrons in the cloth. And with my nuclear background, that was obvious to me when I immediately read the technical paper on this issue.
Love it. All right, let's get to options for image formation.
Yes, okay. Well, we could look at some preliminary items here so that we can say that the images were not formed by an artist or forger based upon the STERP analysis in 1978, because the images are not due to pigment, scorch, liquid, or photography. All attempts to duplicate the images have failed. The very best effort to reproduce the image of the face was actually done by radiation controlled by information, which is interesting. Okay. Now, the images were also not by contact between the body and the cloth, because there is an image on the cloth where the cloth would not have been in contact with the body. For example, if the cloth was in contact with the nose, it would not have been in contact as you go down the nostrils of the nose. Yet we have images of that nostril as you move down the nose on either side. So it's not due to contact between the body and the cloth. It's also not due to diffusion of molecules. I hear this many times. Diffusion is where a molecule just randomly scatters off the air molecules in random directions. But as soon as you do, assume random motion of molecules going from the body to the cloth, you're going to end up with no information left, because in each scattering event, you lose information. And if the scattering events are random, as it is with diffusion of molecules, you'll lose all information in one scattering event, so that you'll have no information to transfer from the body to the cloth. And transfer of the information that defines the appearance of the crucified man has to be transferred from the body to the cloth in order to control which fibers are discolored on the cloth to form the images. Information is the key property to form the images on the cloth. So that has to be a part of the image formation hypothesis. Also, it's unlikely to form the images by any natural process. Think of this. There's been billions of people that have lived and died in the history of the earth, yet this is the only example of an image on a piece of cloth being caused by a person either alive or dead. I've gone through my closet, I've gone through my dresser, and at no time has my body left an image of my body on the inside of anything that any fabric I've been in contact with. And you can do the same experiment. It's safe enough for you to do at home, okay?
I love it. All right, so what is required to form the images on the shroud? This is amazing.
Yeah, so there's 3 different things that are absolute requirements. You have to have a mechanism to discolor the fibers. You have to have energy to drive the discoloration mechanism, and you have to have information to control the discoloration mechanism. That's what I mentioned. That is to discolor only the right fibers with the right length of the discoloration. to form the images. Now, I'm saying that this is caused by radiation, so that the mechanism is related to radiation, and we'll get into that in more detail. The energy is in the radiation itself, and the information is being carried by the radiation, so that the color, shades, and position is being carried by the radiation itself. Just like when you open your eyes and you look at the scene around you, how do you see that? It's because reflected photons reflecting off of everything that you're looking at is carrying information to your eyes. The colors, shades, and locations of each color and shade to your eyes, which is then, when it hits the rods and cones at the back of your eye, it's changed into electrical information carried by the electrons going up your optic nerve to your brain, and your brain has learned to interpret those electrical signals in terms of colors, shades, and positions, so that you can see the scene around you. Almost like everything has been designed.
It's almost as if that's true.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so how do we recognize this is the shroud as a crucified man?
Yes, it's because the information that defines the form of a crucified man has been encoded into the pattern of discolored fibers on the cloth. You know, when you pick up a photograph of your neighbor, your spouse, or whatever, and you look at it and you say, well, that's so-and-so. How is it that you can identify him? Well, it's because the information that defines the appearance of that person has been encoded into the pixels in the photograph. Well, here the pixel is the fiber that's discolored, but it's still information that has been encoded onto the linen cloth that's located in Turin, Italy.
Dr. Cox?
I just wonder if I was muted. No, I'm good. No, this is what I was talking about earlier, the imprint on the image. If you take the current physics, mathematics that's currently believed, that could be the reason.
Yes.
That this has been left behind.
Yeah,
it's a picture of Jesus.
Yeah, so then we can see it because photons of light are reflected off of the shroud and carry that information to our eyes. So that information that's embedded on the cloth is carried to our eyes on reflected photons so that we can see it.
And I'm thinking that could be the result of going from a three-dimensional world to higher dimensions.
Yeah. Well,
the results of what happens.
Yeah, it's just amazing, isn't it? But yeah. One thing to point out here on the face, you can see the eyes, you can see the long nose, you can see the mustache, you can see the points of brightness on the mustache, where I think this is because certain whiskers would be standing upright on the mustache, like little lightning rods. Lightning rod will attract the lightning to the tip of the lightning rod, and that's what happened on the mustache. So the image formation was related to an electrostatic event as well. You see the mustache and the beard, but between the two, you can see the teeth. What you see is vertical lines, which have been identified as teeth. Many people are able to see this. There's been kind of a movement to poo-poo this whole idea, but I think that they are the visibility of these, that they really are in the image, because there's nowhere else on the cloth where you see vertical lines like this except where the teeth ought to be. So that what we have here is that we have radiation being emitted deeper in the body than coming through the teeth, so that leaving this distinction between the bright and dark lines on the teeth, so that it's something coming from within the body. And I'm claiming that it's coming actually from wherever hydrogen is located, as we'll get to that.
I think it's pretty humorous to think that people assume that this could have been a painting in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
No, there's no way.
Yeah,
no
they didn't know they didn't know what to do with it.
Hey, while we're on this picture, do we know the color of Jesus' hair and or mustache?
Well, no, we actually don't have color on the shroud. Everything that we see here is a straw yellow, or sometimes called a sepia color. It's all the same. Sure. This is the color of a scorch. And now, but we've already disproven that it can't be a scorch from a hot object, because that would discolor into the center of the fibers as well. So this is This is a scorch from a different mechanism. Okay.
That's what I was going to say. It could be a scorch from burst of energy and light.
Well, let's share it. Here
Well,
it is, the
yeah, so
VCRB hypothesis. Here we go.
Yeah, this is VCRB. That's an acronym for vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis for image formation. Now, this is how I state it. An extremely brief, intense burst of vertically collimated. Vertically collimated means like it's going up and down. It's not things being emitted, in every different direction. It's just vertically up and vertically down, oscillating between the two. But an extremely brief, intense burst of vertically collimated radiation, like a billion vertically oriented lasers going off simultaneously from within the body. Intense burst of vertically collimated radiation was emitted in the body that rapidly oscillated between vertically up and vertically down directions, so that the front and dorsal images were made at the same time. That's why they're so similar in characteristics. They were made by the same time, even though the dorsal image had the weight of the body on it, whereas the top cloth only had the weight of the cloth on it. Yet the characteristics of the images are so identical because they were both formed by radiation from the body. So this radiation, I think, consisted of charged particles, probably protons, that caused an oscillating corona discharge. That's like a little lightning bolt, static discharge, from the top fibers facing the body that caused a high-frequency alternating current. We're going to an electric current here in the fibers that deposited heat in the thin outer layer of the fibers to discolor it. So in some way, you have to be able to heat this very thin region going all the way around the fiber without that high temperature being reached on the inside of the fiber. And this is the only mechanism that I could think of. And I learned this in my first year of physics at University of Michigan. This is called
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember here. It's okay. The surface effect. Something like the surface effect of an alternating current. And you can look that up on Wikipedia under something like that. So what happens is that an alternating current produces oscillating electric and magnetic fields, which pushes the electrons that are flowing in the wire out to the outer radius of that wire, where they would heat that very region that's needed to achieve a high temperature to scorch it. And I think that's what happened. We have to get back to an alternating electric current in the fibers, in the cloth.
So are you giving a scientific explanation for the bodily resurrection of Jesus, Bob?
Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm just tracking back scientifically. I'm applying science here, only science. And what I end up with is that you have to assume that there was an oscillating electric field which caused the nuclei in the body to oscillate in a manner that provided enough energy for deuterium atoms to split, releasing protons to form the image and neutrons to shift the carbon date forward. But when you say that, you are outside, you are beyond or outside of our current understanding of the laws of physics. So what is it that can explain that? Well, scientifically, you throw up your hands and say, I have no explanation for that scientifically. But when I take off my science hat, put on my Bible believer's hat, and I say, well, isn't that interesting? That's exactly what I would expect when we're talking about the disappearance of Jesus from our perception of reality. I would expect that to take place by a transition into an alternate dimension. Look at my paper 2 on the research page of my website, shroudresearch.net. It goes into that issue. Exactly how did the body disappear? Scientifically, the best option is that his body made a transition into an alternate dimensionality from which then he could return in his post-resurrection appearances by an act of his will, because he was now in a spiritual body, so that his body was under the control of the spirit rather than under the control of physics. He was not in a physical body, he was in a spiritual body, referring to what was controlling the body.
So now we get to the Bible. They touched him So it was
Yes.
when you say spiritual, we don't mean non-physical, but they touched him and saw. Okay, so that's what some people, we're not preaching Gnosticism here by any stretch that the body's bad. It's just it's gone into a different dimension, and we see that obviously as he moves freely in the physical world through walls, through doors, etc., from one place to another place. And this is where it's just mind-blowing, this third to fourth dimension type stuff. Dr. Cox, anything more to add there? And then Bob will give you as we're coming down the home stretch. I only got 5 more minutes, but this is fascinating. Dr. Cox?
No, that's totally right. I mean, we're not talking a spiritual body, meaning just euphemistic and not physical. It's physical in terms of you could touch it and feel it, but it's not, as Bob said, it's not bound by the physical world anymore, because it's accessing powers that he set aside as he become man to live amongst us, but he took that back on again.
So in the change from physical body to spiritual body, the noun hasn't changed. It's still body. It still has mass. It still has inertia. You can touch it. You could eat fish. It's still a body. But there's a basic change from physical to spiritual in the sense of the controlling factors over that body. That's what I would say. But it's still a body. And that nature of the spiritual body is going to be the same nature that we will have in the rapture and our resurrection. Our bodies will be like his bodies.
Yep. Amen. So who is this?
Yeah. So the question is, who is this? There's 2 criteria. One is that this individual was crucified exactly like Jesus was crucified. The second criteria is that an extremely brief, intense burst of radiation from his body produced the front and back images of his body on the cloth, as well as shifted the carbon date forward. So there's only one person in all of history can satisfy these 2 criteria. It can only be satisfied by Jesus in his resurrection. This was Jesus. Amen. That's what I think.
Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Bob, keep going. This is great. What else are you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that. So what this does, there's 3 different categories of evidence that you have in court. There's context. So the context information for the resurrection of Jesus, we have Old Testament prophecies, and we have Jesus' own predictions of his prophecy that were fulfilled. Then there's eyewitness testimony. 2 classes there. We have the empty tomb, testimony of the empty tomb, and testimony of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. But we've never had scientific evidence for his resurrection before. We only have that now with the Shroud of Turin, with what we're saying here, because of the evidence for radiation causing the image and causing the shifting of the carbon date.
Hey, Bob, this has been amazing. I didn't need it, like I said. I mean, the context and the eyewitness testimony is enough. But for some people, right? And I'm speaking to all the people who listened to this and understood everything you said. And I'm not one of those people, because I'm not necessarily a scientist in the same way. I'm more of a historian, right? So the context, the eyewitness kind of speak to me. But for those that have been scientifically wired, you have made a fantastic case for the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Dr. Cox, anything more to say there?
No, I love everything you said. We had him on campus. Very powerful, being able to see the full-length shroud in our sanctuary. And thank you for your time, Bob. I love it. And his paper he suggested, Tim, I'm going to send it to you because it's excellent.
Yes. So the bottom line is we live in a universe where resurrection is possible because it has happened. And we're going to look forward to our resurrection.
Amen. That's it. Christ has been raised, the first fruits of those who are found in faith, in anticipation of our bodily resurrection at the last day. Brand new, imperishable, eternal, powerful, immortal bodies. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. When the new Jerusalem comes down out of heaven like a bride or adorned for her husband, and the dwelling place of God will be with men. We will see him, we will be known, and we will know once again, with no anticipation, with no possibility of the curse, the rebellion, the fall ever being a part of our story again. What has been done will be undone when the new heaven and the new earth descend. Our dwelling place, perfection with God, self, others, and the rest of creation will be ours. And all we will know is the man of light. It's interesting in Scripture how consistent light gets connected with life. We can't live apart from light. And Jesus is the light of the world, and we're connected. We're by faith to the light and to bring the light. And this is an opportunity right now. We are called to witness to the light. And the Shroud of Turin is a wonderful, wonderful gift from God, now through science, able to there's only one who has walked this path, this cruciform and resurrected path, and his name is Jesus. He is the Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who is soon to return. Bob, you are a gift. Dr. Cox, you are a gift. This is the Tim Allman Podcast. Please like, subscribe, comment wherever it is you take this in. And this is going to be released. We're recording this well before Holy Week, but we're going to be releasing this during Holy Week. And I pray this meditation, this scientific explanation, gives you great hope as you follow Jesus from Palm Sunday to the upper room, to the cross, and to the empty tomb. Jesus is risen indeed. Hallelujah. It's a good day. Go and make it a great day. Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks, Dr. Cox.